Hi everybody. Apologies this morning. We had some technical difficulties. Clearly the Australian federal government is well secured, so well secured that they wouldn't let Bruce out. Anyway, we will kick off and thank you everybody for joining us for this morning's webinar. We're going to be discussing with Bruce his office, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, and how they work with small businesses like yours. We've got, well, probably a little bit less than half an hour, but we'll do our best anyway. Hopefully everybody can hang on for the whole webinar. But to kick off, there is a Q&A section just at the bottom of the screen. So if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to pop them in the Q&A section and we'll kick straight into it. So Bruce, thanks for joining us again. Always appreciate you joining us each year and giving up your valuable time, not only to work through the technical difficulties of getting into the webinar, but also just to have a chat about small business and what's happening and what you're seeing. And I guess where I wanted to start was ASBFEO. I always love that acronym. Its role is really to provide small businesses with assistance, policy and advocacy support, and also to collect relevant data about them. So I suppose where I wanted to start with sort of the economy as a background, what are you seeing right now around Australia? What is the data you're collecting and the inquiries the team at ASBFEO are receiving telling you about small businesses in the current economy, and what's coming out of that that might be relevant to our members and their decision making?
Yeah, Ben, thank you. And my apologies as well to all of your audience. Just to explain, Treasury doesn't like us using Zoom. So we have to do a number of workarounds to get the kit to function. But anyway, we've done that and we're straight into it. Yeah, what we're seeing is things are pretty tough. We're seeing a real challenging time of increased input costs, margin squeeze, a drying up of demand, particularly in discretionary expenditure spaces. And at a high level of distress amongst small and family businesses. We know many are operating without any cash reserves. That's a concern. We know many are not paying themselves in some cases, or certainly taking a hit. And we know many are looking at ways of putting efficiencies into their business. Then we do some data scrapes off a range of interesting sources as well to help us flesh out that picture. And we're seeing more are inquiring about shutting down their business, what they do with staffing or reducing rosters and things of that kind than we've seen for some time. So that's a concern. We're also seeing an uptick in insolvencies, and the tax office is up and about now, and that's really bringing some pressure points forward. But we're also getting disputes where the numbers involved, the sums of money are larger. The parties are almost hardening in their position. So, they're sort of saying, we're really insisting on our interests being fully respected, and that makes finding mediated solutions very difficult. And we're also hearing from my state small business colleagues, there's a lot of tenancy issues emerging as a deferral around leases is now being called back and called forward, and these are hundreds of thousands of dollars of money in some cases. So it's pretty tough. More headwinds than winds in the sail, and no sloppy, easy profits to be found anywhere, Ben.
And do you put that down to a lot of that being still a hangover from COVID? I mean, obviously it's quite a long time ago now, or is it more around the lack of discretionary spend and just the tightening in available dollars to spend in retail and so on in the economy, and I guess the cost increases across business as well?
Yeah, look, I think it's a blend of all of those things. What COVID's done, and for some businesses, the government support that was available, the accommodations that the tax office and major lenders were providing, the assistance, if we could call it that landlords and others were offering during that time. Some of that's now coming home to roost, and that's really proving to be just an extra burden, more lead in the saddlebag at a time when things are quite challenging anyway. Those input costs keep going up. So you're seeing the wage picture really putting more demands on small business. You're seeing tenancy costs up. Insurance has gone through the roof. Even cost of funds. I mean, a lot of people talk about interest rates and their impact on households, and that's very significant. Don't have me infer that I underestimate the impact of that, and that's having an impact on discretionary spending, but it's also having an impact on the cost of funds for small businesses. And it's always important to remember half of all small business finance is secured by the family home. So there's an awful lot of skin in the game when it comes to meeting those payments. And we're seeing a lot of business owners not looking after their own interests, frankly. The last full year of tax data points to 43% of businesses not being profitable. We've seen some recent survey work through Prosper and YouGov where there's around 40% of businesses think things are going to be harder, either somewhat or significantly harder and poorer in terms of profitability from last year. And then we're also seeing for self-employed people, independent contractors, those sorts of people, 73% of those people whose self-employment is their full-time livelihood endeavor are taking home less money than average total weekly earnings. So, we really think it's a seriously concerning time, and that there's a need for us to think less about how we can reduce new headwinds. We've got to keep doing that, but think more about what we can do to put wind in the sails to advantage enterprising men and women as we see the big end of town seemingly doing better. Profit trajectories are stronger, financial positions are stronger, their asset base is stronger, whereas the small business end is really struggling now. And that's why we keep saying, hey, front of mind policymakers, you've got to think more about the small business community because it's really tough going right now.
No, thanks for that. And I'm definitely going to ask you a bit more about productivity as we go through some of the questions. But for those members that are feeling that pain at the moment, do you have any tips on, the things that they should be thinking about until we do see, some green shoots in consumer confidence maybe later in the year or as we come into early 25?
Yeah, I do have a couple of thoughts, and a number of them are pretty obvious, but often difficult to deal with when you're the person in that situation. The need to actually speak, to talk to your creditors, to talk to the tax office, to have early conversations when you're feeling things are really starting to squeeze, but to know your numbers in your business, to know when that's happening. Often we see businesses and business leaders with so much on their mind just getting through the day and feeling that heavy responsibility for the business, their identity is interwoven in it, there's staff and other livelihoods dependent on it, can really find that's very overwhelming and can sometimes cocoon at a time when really engaging, whether with their industry association, their peers, their creditors. This is a really important conversation to have. We're also seeing a lot of people really looking hard at their input contracts. It's not the sexiest thing in town to do, but there are better deals around in terms of energy and the like. And even with insurance, set and forget on insurance is seeing 14, 15% embedded, but then sometimes a whole lot more really looking at those input costs and seeing what's happening. The other thing too is understand what's working in the business. Some of the data that's available can present great ahas about when you're most profitable, when things are moving, when those discretionary expenditure items, it might be the scented candles are moving, when people come to engage, those sorts of things. And some of the analytics that are available through your financial provider, MasterCard can give you some information. Really get the best insights you can about what's happening in your business and with your customers to make the most of these difficult times so you're well placed when the green shoots start emerging. So there'll be maybe 3 points. I guess the one to take home though, look after yourself.
Yeah.
Owning and running a business is a big responsibility. We're arguing it's getting even more challenging and the risks are more significant with wage theft concerns, new obligations around parental leave, domestic violence leave, the privacy changes that have foreshadowed. It's getting, in our view, more complicated to run a business. And we're arguing that probably advantages big businesses that have got, 20 people in a compliance area, sophisticated systems, but it's harder for small businesses that aren't a shrink-wrapped version of those big ones. And that can all be heavy emotional baggage and weight, which might make your own wellness something really to turn your mind to. Don't boil the ocean. Set your lists of the things that are important for you to do. You hear people talk about mindfulness. I'm not that kind of guy. I don't really go into that for that much. But what I do go into is time away to re-nourish yourself. Prioritizing the important tasks so you don't have everything that's on your plate feeling like an enormous weight. Checking in, listening to yourself, knowing when you might be a little bit under pressure, you're not making good decisions, you're not absorbing the information, you're maybe not communicating the best. Sometimes just going for a walk down the beach and just chilling and just getting a chance to nourish yourself. That's the sort of thing I'd be encouraging people to think about.
No, they're all really, really valuable points. And I always kind of think if you can also just focus on the things that you can control sometimes, because sometimes you can look at the whole picture and it can be overwhelming, whereas it's things become simpler if you actually just act on the things that you can actually control.
Well, we put this out, which is about, looking after your emotional well-being, and they're the tips. Structure your day, have particular times when you do things. Look at your own well-being. Don't try and do everything. Prioritize what can be done and what you can actually influence, but also celebrate the to-dos that you get done. Now, the last thing it also says is join industry associations. There's rarely a problem that someone else hasn't had to navigate and who's happy to give you tips on what they learned. And that's the thing about being open to that input, not cocooning, but saying, hey, I've got this issue. What do you reckon? And often the peer group on this call will be the best source of advice going around.
Yeah, no, I think that's all really good. And it was one thing I came across yesterday with that about, with your to-do list, get the really important things on your to-do list done early in the morning if you can, and rather than doing all the little minutiae details and then waiting to do the big stuff later. It's always.
I reckon that's a great tip, Ben. And the other thing too, there's this new curse of busyness, B-U-S-Y-ness, where you're just running around like a headless chook. You're flat out, but you're often sort of trying to respond there and then to every email that comes in. No, give yourself some clear air. 2 hours in the morning, do the important stuff, then get to the emails later and actually not be sucked into this. Oh, I've got to do this, got to do that. You're in charge. Shape the use of a scarce resource, and that's your time, and really use that to its best effect. And that might mean leaving the emails till later in the day.
No, great conversation. Now, I was just going to move on to your opinion on some of the changes that we've seen the government have recently brought in with the ACCC around the new designated complaints framework. Really keen to understand, what is that new model for? Do you think it'll actually be more effective or efficient for small businesses who've got competition concerns? And, how's it relevant to our members?
Yeah, look, it's interesting. We championed this idea based on a UK model, and it was good to see the incoming government interested in it as well, because they'd spoken about it before. We said, hey, this could really help. In the UK model, it was called super complainants. Now, why we liked that was it was not only a fast track into the competition regulator's inbox and a real prioritization to look at what issues have been raised, there was some duty to do something about it. And if I could speak frankly, that's my greatest frustration, is that we've got these legal protections, these bumper rails, these codes that govern conduct and try and make sure businesses big and small have every opportunity to succeed, and you get to compete on your merits, not on your economic muscle. We've got those safeguards there. Problem is, too often they're infringed upon and the Commission does nothing about them. They do nothing about them not because they're not interested, they're very empathetic and they're very engaged, but they use taxpayers' money to carry out enforcement activities. And obviously they've got to decide how they allocate that money. So they've got an investigative and enforcement framework that emphasizes systemic failure, things that have a material impact on the economy or considerable public interest. Now, if I'm a franchisee and I go and think about buying a franchise unit, I pay my $600,000, but I'm still in the cooling off window. And my wife says, Bruce, you're a little overexcited about that. Let's not do that. Let's do this. Okay, I'll exercise my cooling off rights. I pull out of the deal. Where's my money? Now, the franchisor might go, oh, well, we'll get to it eventually. It's go, no, hang on. That's all I've got. And I can't invest in anything else. Might not mean much to you, but that's everything in my life savings there. Now, that would be a blatant breach of the franchise code. If I took that to the ACCC, they go, yeah, that's bad. That folks you're dealing with, they're bad hombres. That is not good, Bruce. Well, what are you going to do about it? Yeah, nothing. Nothing. Because it's just you. It's my world. It's my whole commercial opportunity ambition, my whole financial nest egg, but it's not systemic. It's not of material impact to the economy, and there's no considerable public interest. So in using the taxpayers' resources in a rational but rationed way, that's never going to get through the gate. Now, the designated complainants was designed to say, we get 7,000 matters through my office a year that are business disputes. And if we see recurring patterns, we want to say to the Commission, hey, this matters. This is happening too much. Too many people are being harmed. And we did that with Jump Swim and a few other cases. But by the time the Commission gets around to doing something about it, more people have lost their life savings, had their business lives ruined, and we just didn't think that was responsive enough. That's why we pushed for this super complainants thing. What's come back, though, through the Parliament is this designated complainant. And what it says is we'll designate in a couple of industry associations, people like me, and we can nominate these things, and we promise to have a look at them. But we'll look at them through the same lens that we look at everything else. So we've still got to get through this gate of systemic failure, considerable impact on the economy, or considerable public interest. Our stuff still won't get through, even if it's come from a designated complainant. So we think this is a potentially, it could have been a better idea. It was a good idea. It could have been better implemented, but we'll wait and see what happens. For me, though, my legislation allows me to refer stuff to the Commission anyway, which we do. My frustration is that they don't always do anything about it because it doesn't get through those gates, and we see the harm that it's causing. So we've been saying this is fine, but there's something missing. If I, as a business owner, want to protect my economic interest and draw the other party to account for their behaviour, then you know where we've got to go? The Federal Court of Australia.
No one wants
$250,000. $250,000 if you're lucky. You've got to wait a couple of years. It's got a cost orders jurisdiction. So if I lose, I get to pay the other party's costs. Now tell me, how is that of any use whatsoever to a smaller family business? So what we've been working on, and I'd love your support for it, is to create a federal circuit court small business and codes list that functions more like a state-based tribunal. You might cap the awards or the penalties at $1 million. You pay your own costs. There's compulsory alternative dispute resolution at the front end. It can be done virtually, so you don't need to travel to the big smoke where the federal court is, and you get timely action and scope for remedy. And here's a novel idea. Why not enable economic interest holders to defend their own economic interest? Right now, you hope and pray the regulator will step in. What's wrong with you defending your own economic interest? That's the sort of thing we think needs to be really brought forward to bring to life these codes and safeguards and consumer law protections and things like that, so that small and family businesses can really benefit from those things and not hope and pray the regulator gets out and helps them when they feel infringed upon.
No, we love that idea. It would be far more effective, so we'll definitely get behind it. So the next question I had is, obviously we've just had a review of the Franchising Code of Conduct by Michael Shaper, and it's included things like fixed terms for reviews, which was something that ALNA had been calling for. And obviously there's some significant changes around that impact your office and your role with franchising. So I was hoping you could give the members a bit of an update on the changes that came through from that review and how the revised code might impact them.
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things. There's a general view the code's fit for purpose. So that was the conclusion the government arrived at, and they'll be remaking the code. because these codes sunset and you need a conscious decision to remake them. So that's a tick to go to do that. A couple of areas where there's a few tweaks, some issues around bringing over ideas like, is there a legitimate prospect of a profit? As in, you can't just franchise a brain fart and hope people think they'll make money out of it. Where's the rigor that sits around it? Whether there is a real business franchisable opportunity. So some discussion around that. There's also a broadening of what we do. Many people on this call would probably already be aware we do the dispute resolution if they can't be resolved internally. The code speaks to franchise systems having internal dispute resolution mechanisms. That's the preferred option. But if that doesn't work, then they come to us, and then we put in place some alternative dispute resolution arrangements. What we're being asked to do, though, Ben, is to provide more education and more information to prospective franchisees, but also franchisors. In my office, we get probably 12, 13% of the matters that come to us relates to franchising. They're not the big brands. They're very rarely, the big sophisticated franchise systems, because they actually know what they're supposed to do, and they usually have the proper mechanisms to sort things out. Sometimes can get a little overbearing. All of that is true, but they kind of at least know what they should be doing. Where we get most of our work is from businesses that are both small as the franchisee and the franchisor. And we're almost sitting there coaching them both on how to work out things. We remind franchisors that they're supposed to be in the franchise disclosure register. They go, what's that? So there's a little bit more of that involved in our work. The other thing is, as you know, there's an option for the parties to agree to arbitration. Now, we've had a number of parties ask for that. We've not had one example where the other counterparty to a dispute has agreed to it. Why? Most people weigh up their tactical options. Go back to the earlier comment about a legal dispute ending up in the federal court. If you thought that was the next step for maybe not being that helpful in resolving a dispute, you'd probably think your position's pretty strong, wouldn't you? Is this small business going to take me to the federal court? Well, probably not. So why should I agree to arbitration? We think if you had like the Federal Circuit Court mechanism, that would incentivize people to be more interested in resolving a dispute. And secondly, we think, and we've done this in the automotive industry, why not get people to pre-commit to arbitration when there's no dispute? To say we are so committed to the relationships we have between franchisors and franchisees, we pre-commit to arbitration come what may. And we think that kind of decision, and then maybe have it recognized on the franchise disclosure register, gives the existing mechanisms a better chance of being used. Because at the moment, that decision about whether to agree to arbitration is a tactical one made at the time there is a dispute. Wouldn't you like some of the franchisor counterparties that your members deal with to say, no, we believe in resolution, and as a gesture of the symbiotic relationship between franchisor and franchisee, we pre-commit to arbitration. So come what may, we'll try and work it out. We'll go through, mediation, but if push comes to shove, we're not going to drag our franchisees through the courts, particularly the federal court. We'll agree to arbitration. So we think there's some scope in that as an idea. Government's not committed to it yet, that we think there's merit in that. Why have I raised it? In the Shaper review, they recommended a licensing regime be examined so that a franchise system would need to be licensed, that there was evidence that there was a bankable, investable proposition, that there were fit and proper people operating it, that the required systems were in place. Now, that's what the ACCC's argued for, hoping it'll do two things: cut off the bad hombres before they actually get into offering franchise investment opportunities, but also through those licensing models, and we see it in the banking sector, in insurance, you can then require as part of the licensing process that people pre-commit as a license condition to arbitration. And that's how ASCA functions, the telecommunications industry ombudsman. That's the model. So the ACCC was saying, gee, if we could get to that point, that'd be great. Now, for us, I can see what the motivation is and I see merit in it. But let's go back to where I started. The vast majority of the matters that come to us, the franchisor is no more well-resourced than the franchisee.
Yeah.
Are they going to jump through another layer of regulatory impost and compliance burden that they don't, in some cases, they don't even know the ones that are there now. And we are already one of the most regulated franchise economies in the world. So that's still work to be done. In the shorter term, though, there's issues that the government's committed to. One of them is giving me the opportunity, frankly, to trash talk people that don't play nice. So under my current legislation, if people don't engage in good faith, I've got a legislative power to notify. Now, that means I go out in any media channel that we choose is appropriate and saying, hey, we had this dispute with this party and they behave like absolute peanuts. Caution if you're dealing or thinking about doing business with this party. That happens in other disputes, not in franchising, because it's governed by the code. And the government said, no, Bruce should be able to call out really poor performing players that aren't acting in good faith, just as an alert to other businesses in thinking of dealing with them.
No, that's great. There's some interesting elements to that discussion about, backing in the culture of your franchise. So it's definitely something that is worth considering. Just moving on, because I know we're a little bit short of time. Your office has significant inquiry powers. I know you've already done some really valuable work in that space. Are there any new issues on your radar?
Yeah, well, right now, and I've got about 9 days to land an inquiry report with the government on how small businesses are navigating ESG. Now, it's popping up everywhere, but most small businesses think this is a funky big end of town and finance.
You wanted to say what ESG means for those that are maybe not as in the loop?
Yeah, so it's a catch-all phrase for environmental, social, and governance considerations around the business. Your members would know about triple bottom line. They'd know about integrated reporting. They'd be aware of a range of social license obligations, and most small businesses want to be a positive part of their local community. So they're doing a whole bunch of this stuff anyway. They just don't call it that. But what's happening is regulators and governments around the globe and the finance and investment sector has really been pushing this stuff forward because it really goes to the durability, the risks, the resilience, the sustainability of businesses. And they want to know those things and report upon them. Most jurisdictions of advanced economies are looking for big corporates to report, for instance, on their climate related matters that go to financial disclosure, maybe to risks or their emissions profile. You've all seen people have to report on modern slavery obligations. There's a range of things that are out there. Now, a lot of these things, Ben and colleagues, are targeted at big corporates. But if you're part of a supply chain to one of those big corporates, it takes exactly 3 minutes for those big corporates to go, oh, Kearney, you're a supply chain participant into Enterprise X. We've got a report on this. You tell me what your take is on it. And then, Ben, you've got to go and rustle up all this information about your scope 3 emissions, about who's involved in your supply chain, whether someone's buying, say, stationary gear that's manufactured in a country where there's slave child labor. I mean, all this sort of stuff, you can understand what the motivation is. But at times, all of these are compliance and reporting obligations that are just a pain in the neck. And a lot of small businesses don't have the systems and resources to do it. The flip side is a lot of businesses look at things like energy consumption, water efficiency, circular economy, packaging, and think, hang on, I can save some money here. There's an upside for my business in being across these issues, know where I'm at, seeing where some opportunities are, and knowing there might be some regulation down the track, I'm already good to go. So government's asked me some advice on how to deal with this. I keep saying, be really mindful, time poor, not really profitable businesses probably don't want to be spending a whole lot of time on this stuff. What information can you drag out of natural business systems? What are businesses already doing? Like an ESG consideration is, how do you treat your staff? Well, The Fair Work Ombudsman will tell you if you're not treating them right in terms of payment and remuneration and benefits. So, I mean, there's already stuff in this space. So government's asked us for advice on that. We did some work on procurement. I was told, and everyone tells me the procurement system sucks. And if you're part of the in crowd, you know how to play it. If you're a new business wanting to supply to the Commonwealth, it's wildly complicated, too much fog. And even procuring officials don't always know how to use the rules, the Commonwealth procurement rules. So we gave some advice on that. Somewhat underwhelmed by the government response, but that could be a discussion for another day. And then looking forward, we'll soon be starting more work on what we're calling energize enterprise. We think the risk-reward balance for small and family businesses is a little out of whack. We think there's far more headwinds coming at these businesses than wind in the sails. And what's the consequence of that? We know small business generates, a third of GDP, but it used to be 41%. We know 2 in every 5 private sector jobs are made possible by small businesses. Well, it used to be nearly half. We know the average age of a business owner is now 50, and we know that business owners under the age of 30 is only 8% of the economy. It used to be 17. So there's something going on, and we're trying to say, well, what is it that's going on that's making entrepreneurship less attractive than it used to be? We've got some thinking around that, but we want to test that and see, and we would value your input too, about just whether people think it's just too bloody hard for the rewards. We hear a bit of that, and then we're just trying to unpick what else is going on in that space.
No, well, I think that's a perfect segue to my next question, which is really, I suppose, a personal bugbear of mine, but maybe one that's shared by you, is, the current government's policy approach has been, I suppose, in the regulatory environment for small businesses, it's been getting more and more onerous, as you've touched on, and obviously more expensive now. Is it becoming more expensive just because of the sort of macro economy, or is it becoming more expensive because of some of the regulation? That includes things like cost shifting and others. We haven't seen much happening in that productivity side of the economy from regulators or the Parliament. But I guess my great concern is if we don't provide some efficiency dividends to these small businesses soon, it's going to make our economy uncompetitive long term. And you also touched on that age issue. I mean, we see in our sector, a lot of our business owners are older. And I know it's something that we've, tried to address in some of the research that we've done and so on, is like, what are the policy settings that we need to encourage those young people that are working in these businesses to step up and say, hey, I want to buy that business from you because I know I can make a success of it. But we're not seeing that in the economy right now.
Yeah, look, I think you're right. That's my thesis as well, that those headwinds, the administrative and compliance burden, and the risks attached to them. I mean, we know, well, let's just pick on wages. We've got one of the world's most complicated industrial relations systems. Your people on this call can create a $10 million business. So clever and insightful and wise are they, but still never know if they're actually paying people the right rates because the system's so complicated. And to point that out, we've seen some of the largest businesses in Australia, really well-resourced, let's call it back-end businesses like universities, and even the government department itself that writes the rules have got this wrong. So you sit there and you think, there's a little wonder it's a bit of a challenge point for small business. That you used to get called out, you might get penalized. Now there's this concept of wage theft that criminalizes it unless you can show you've taken certain steps. So what I'm saying is the burden is significant. The systems are complicated. Most people want to do the right thing, but it can be kind of hard to know what that is at sometimes. But to get it wrong now, the impact and the punishment is getting sharper and harder as well. So that's the scene that we think that's not as attractive as it should be for an enterprising person who frankly doesn't get into the business for the back end of running the business. There's other motivations there. And their jam is not, gee, I've got more compliance to do today. I mean, I'm just trying to get my wife to organise her receipts because I do her BAS, and we're coming to the end of the financial year. She outsources it to me. Bless the bodacious Mrs. Billson for that task that I get. But that's an example of that compliance task that is unattractive, that seems to have been designed for larger businesses. Got resources, specialists on staff, more sophisticated systems, yet we're having these conversations and we're saying, hey, we're not saying don't regulate where there's a risk that needs to be guarded against, but right size it so that it's able to be implemented and in a relevant way to small business. Now, in some cases, it might not be relevant at all. But let's pick privacy. We know the blanket small business exemption, save a few things in health and employment, is likely to end shortly. Now, the worst thing you could do as a government, in my mind, is say to small business, go and pick up those dozen plus privacy principles and knock yourself out. Most people go, hang on, I don't even know what you're talking about. And I don't have 40 hours to probe the principles. I don't want to spend the money to get specialist advice. We're sort of saying, hey, we kind of get the idea that if I'm a news agent and I've got all of this detailed information about my clients, including financial records and all sorts of things, I've got a particular responsibility to look after them. I get that. But let's understand what the risk is and then right size is the word we're using, the regulatory imposition to take account of the real risk and the resources and capability and the support that's needed for a business to meet those objectives. So we're calling for government to take this more seriously. There's the International Micro, Small and Medium Enterprise Day coming up. We're saying front of mind. Small businesses need to be front of mind because I'm not sure they are right now. And that's why you're seeing some of the decisions, even the paid parental leave stuff, that's got more moving parts in it. I've said all along, if you've got to liaise with Services Australia to pay it, let them pay it. Why does the business need to double handle that money? Oh, but Bruce, you must understand there's often extra, benefits on top. Yeah, I said there might be with larger businesses, but that's not the story of a small business. They're flat out trying to work out how to fill the vacancy and keep the show on the road. I said, anyway, that's the sort of example where we get really exasperated that it seems to be a big end of town view brought to issues that end up landing disproportionately heavy on small business. We're urging that there be a small business impact section in regulatory impact statements, because too often the regulatory impact statements are not meeting the objectives of minimum effective intervention. They're just going through the motions, or in some cases, they're not doing them at all. We're saying, no, you really got to think about it. And that's one of the reasons I set up this agency, was that government departments and policymakers and regulators, if they didn't know who to talk to, we'd find them. We'd make sure they had that small business voice, strong and loud, front of mind, bright on the radar screen whenever they're thinking about a program, a policy, a regulatory intervention. And then also, when I've got to mention this seafood labeling thing, oh my goodness. If you and I are running a pizza, we've now got to know where the anchovies have come from. Now, I get it if we were fishmongers and you had, walls of glass cabinets full of fish. It's appropriate that you say where it's come from. The customer wants to know it. But if I'm going to visit the Thai restaurant down the corner and there's a prawn chucked into, my special fried rice or whatever the case may be, seriously? Do you want to track the etymology of the prawn and then put a reporting obligation on menu? I mean, that's just stupid. But anyway, that's the sort of stuff we're dealing with, and we persevere. And I'm probably usually more careful in not reflecting my frustration. Sorry.
Oh, no, that one's
a little bit unvarnished there. But
for somebody that used to actually own a business that sold pizzas, I totally hear you. I mean, it's really interesting, the productivity thing. I mean, it's one thing that I've sort of been pushing through my role with Council of Small Business is this idea of, we had this Jobs and Skills Summit a while ago, and ever since that, and I'm not here to say good, bad, or ugly with regards to the government's policies, but we've seen a lot of additional regulation for small business. And I would love to see the other side of that, where we put small business productivity and efficiency up in lights and have a bit of a competitive debate, I think, publicly around what can be done. I know, we haven't seen any effort by the Parliament recently to actually reduce red tape. So anyway, I'll keep on that bandwagon.
Look, and I'm there with you, mate. I'm in that cart with you. In fact, we've been out there arguing the energised enterprise piece through that lens. We've been saying to Treasury and other officials, look where the economy is going. There's a need to bolster productivity, wealth creation, and innovation. Where's that story? We've got these these funds for green hydrogen and all that. I mean, I'm sure the small business community is just going to be able to line up and easily get a piece of that action. But even right now, I mean, the instant asset write-off measure hasn't passed the Parliament for this financial year. So the law that enables an instant asset write-off to 20K for this financial year hasn't passed the Parliament yet. And the soonest it's likely to happen is on the 24th of June. Now, what chance do you have, knowing that that's now there, to go and act upon it, get those assets that are productivity improving? Might be digitization, might be something that really boosts the output or new offering from your business. And you've not only got to work out what it is, fund it, get it installed and be ready or actually used by June 30. And then the other part is the energy efficiency area. Now, a lot of your members in shopping centres and the like have very little control over the energy regime that they have to pay, basically. So here's a measure that was designed to support businesses invest in more energy efficient technology. It might have been more energy efficient fridges, lighting, these sorts of things. That measure hasn't passed yet. You've got to be clear on what the rules are, know what's eligible, probably get advice to make sure that it's okay what you're thinking to invest in, and then have it all installed and ready to go in a week. I mean, come on. So we've been saying to the government and to the Parliament generally, you've got to be more serious than this. If you really want to energise enterprise and get behind small business, if you really want these tax measures to incentivise investment in productivity, improving business efficiency, innovation-led investment, give people half a chance to make use of these incentives, or stop banging on about them. Because if you're not going to be serious about them and give business a chance, why do them? If it's of such low priority, it's been promoted for 15 months and hasn't got through the Parliament. To quote John McEnroe after a bad line call, you can't be serious. But that's where we are. And that's why we think there needs to be a mind shift, that we really need to lift the focus. And that's an important task of industry bodies like your own, is to be part of that debate, because I'm just not hearing enough about it. And I'm also not seeing governments think, wow, we do need to do more about it. I just don't think there's enough focus and priority given to the interests of enterprising men and women right now. Jobs and Skills Summit didn't even mention 1.5 million people that are self-employed.
Yeah.
What's that about? You look at when I used to be somebody as a cabinet minister, I was involved in hosting the G20 here, and we had a B20 session of the business community of the 20 largest economies. And you had all the usual suspects, the big end of town crowd. The topic was, how do you lift growth 2% above business as usual? All of them to a T said you've got to energize enterprise, support innovation, new business, small business, bringing new minds into wealth creation. Yet there was no one in the room that actually represented that group. So I set up a SME B20 session where we teased out what that would look like. And you and I have touched on some of the levers that could be pulled to make, entrepreneurial life more attractive, more rewarding, and able to drive growth and recovery in the economy.
No, that's fantastic, Bruce. And I think we've all got to play our part, obviously, in getting louder on some of those things, because we desperately need it for our small businesses to see them sort of, efficiently be able to tackle the next 12, 18, 24 months. I might leave it there. I had a couple of other questions, but I think we're well and truly out of time. But that's been fabulous, and thank you for the people that are still on the line for hanging on for a bit longer session today. We really, really appreciate it. And Bruce, we really look forward to talking to you again, and really appreciate all the work that you're doing as a strong advocate for our member small businesses.
Happy to help anytime, and great to be with you, colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thanks, everyone.